The way that Kilkenny tried to set up or do things differently, Brian Cody's team versus Derek Ling's team, I'd have said one thing that they did was they set off the puckouts in the first half, which meant that the half backline wasn't thrown to the Wolves like they were last year, where Limerick could fold in and then run out into space. I felt that Wally Walsh was on that right wing on Kyle Hayes, but he was kind of sitting off him almost at times, so that Hayes couldn't just kind of run into that 60 yards of space as he likes to do. But ultimately, obviously, Kyle took over the game. But what did you see Kilkenny doing that you think, got them in such a great position in that first half?
The first 5 minutes of the game, really, if you look at it, the first ball when it went down and Kilkenny cleared, when Limerick, Darragh Donovan got the first ball and drove it in, and Limerick cleared it back. And I just think it emphasised what Derek was trying to do, protect his half back line. TJ is the man who was back 50 yards from his own goal and cleared it. The next ball, the next puck out that came down the field, it came down that same wing again. And Walter Walsh was only 60 yards, 55, 60 yards from his own goals. I think the whole Kilkenny half forward line dropped back. I think Walter, I'll be honest about it, I don't think Walter's that kind of a player. I think that Walter's nearly better off. At one stage yesterday, I was thinking to myself, what would I do if I was Derek Ling? And one of the things that I would have tried yesterday was to throw Walter Walsh in centre forward on top of William O'Donoghue. Because William sits, and if Kilkenny could have got the ball up that channel, right, where Limerick had just shored up at that stage, made it a physical battle between William O'Donoghue and Walter Walsh. That's one of the things that I would have tried yesterday. But definitely the way they sat back, Kilkenny came back to field in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the game and really worked hard. And it creates an opportunity to get ball into the likes of Owen Cody and to get ball into I thought Tom Phelan was absolutely immense yesterday. He's worked with up and down the field. He was nearly playing as a third midfielder. He probably was a third midfielder. But yet when he got the opportunity to take that, when that's 10, 15 yards of space, when he got onto position, and he took 2 great points in the first half. I think he broke down the ball as well for Owen Cody's goal. Owen Cody just ran at the right angle and stuck the ball in the back of net. It was Kilkenny's work rate. It was Kilkenny's their urgency on the dropping ball as well, on breaking ball. Like the whole second half, Limerick, when the puck out was going long, when Owen Murphy was going long, Limerick were breaking the ball back down. So many players, David Reid came back down, picked up ball. They just did what Limerick did, what they did in the process, and look, we all know what it is now. But in terms of where Kilkenny really lost it yesterday, I think was the urgency. That urgency, people said that they couldn't maintain it for the whole 70 minutes. Fair enough, it's an intensity, but yet they didn't have their pivots underneath their puckouts like they did in the first half. There was a massive urgency. I think Conor Fogarty going to wing back was definitely a loss to the Kilkenny midfielder, because Conor's one of those guys that really gets on breaking ball. You look over around the middle field, Adrian Mullen, while he had a good game when Kilkenny were really, really in it, Adrian Mullen was very, very good. Overall, I think when you look at the second half, he drifted out of the game. But it's more Limerick's process, the intensity of Limerick, what they do. And if you go back and if you try to compare yesterday's Kilkenny team to the Kilkenny team of the noughties, the Kilkenny team yesterday was nowhere near as physically strong as the Kilkenny team of the noughties. That's the major difference, that if you compare the two teams, they've lost 2 All-Ireland finals in a row, right? How many times in the past have it happened that people have lost 2 All-Ireland finals in a row to other? It's not Kilkenny's mentality, it's not their frame of mind that they lose 2 All-Irelands in a row. They've been beaten yesterday, but I think they'll have to accept this by a really, really very, very good hurling team. I remember after the National Hurling League final this year, Shane, I was blown in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and I came out and I said that day, I said, Derek Ling will be scratching his head to know where he was going. He tried, he went with the Billy Drennans, he went with the Timmy Cliffords, he brought on Jared Dunn that day, a lot of last year's under-20s. And, he tried to integrate him into a system. But that day alone, I think Derek learned a lot, because I said he'd be scratching his head going back down the bus to Kilkenny. Where is he going to get him to try and get over the line? But yet, Kilkenny, as they do over the years, almost Cody-esque now, I will say this, they stuck with players that were mentally mature, right? He didn't really introduce them yesterday. And going forward, I think that's one of the things that he's going to have to do to get this Kilkenny team up. He's going to have to bring in energy. There's possibly 3 or 4 of them that will be looking down this morning, scratching their head and going, have I the mentality to come back this year? I'm not doubting these guys, because these guys are all winners. The Richie Hogans, the TJs, the Conor Fogartys this morning, they're waking up and they're going, right, have we, where am I now? I know a break will do them good, but You know, they're all with very, very, very competitive clubs with Kilkenny, and that's one of the things, especially with Ballyhale, with TJ. Like, they'll want to win another county championship. They'll want to retain an All Ireland club championship, do 3 in a row. So it's phenomenal what's going on in their heads this morning. And the break is going to do them the world of good. But yes, Kilkenny have not really unearthed any new talent other than Tom Phelan this year. I suppose Liam Blanchfield has really stepped up to the mark as well this year. But that Limerick team, like, look at Cathal O'Neill, you know, and there's still 1 or 2 other guys around the place. Aidan O'Connor, I was delighted to see Aidan O'Connor yesterday. I think is a lad that when he does mature and when he I suppose serves his apprenticeship in that Limerick panel, he's going to be massive, you know, and I think that Limerick still have another 1 or 2. Shane O'Brien is another player. I think that, you know, come next year, National Hurling League, John is really going to have to introduce these players and introduce the freshness back into the Limerick team again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that Limerick panel, and Michael talked about it earlier, that the age profile is pretty decent. Actually, while you mentioned the midfield there and Conor Fogarty going wing back, unless he was injured, I was surprised he was taken off at half time because I thought he was doing okay. And Tom Marty,
I thought he was doing okay. Yeah, like, I didn't see the reason to make a switch. Now, being honest.
Yeah, but like I gotta ask you, like a midfield of Adrian Mullen and John Donnelly, and I know it's kind of forced through injury to some degree, but like I think you're left with 2 lads who are forwards really, and I know Adrian Mullen, like he's been wearing number 9 for the last year or so or whatever, so you might think he's midfield all the time, but I felt he was half forward more so last year. Like, think of his performance against Clare in the semi-final. So to me, there was an imbalance to that. And then also, while you mentioned the ages, Leo, I was looking at just the ages of the Kilkenny players afterwards. Owen Murphy, 32. Now, obviously, he's a goalkeeper and he can play on for several more years. Reid's 35, turning 36. Richie Reid's 30. Conor Fogarty, 33. Killian Buckley, 32. Wally Walsh, the same. Richie Hogan's 35 soon. Pádraig Walsh, 31. So the age profile is not brilliant when you consider that none of the under 20s were used, Michael.
Yeah, I just looked at the program last night in the train home, and I was thinking there's 5 or 6 lads here potentially that mightn't come back next year. That won't be the case. They're not all going to retire like that. Maybe there'll only be 1 or 2. But
yeah, that's all kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff as well, because obviously that isn't really worth the paper it's printed on, Nicky. But like, do you see this stopping?
Yeah, you were touching at straws all right, Shane. There now, I have to admit.
It was more of a wind up than anything else, and I got what I was after, so you know that was a bit of crack. What's coming in Kilkenny? Because you know Limerick did pull away, and they pulled away against Galway as well. They do this to teams, but do you feel like this is kind of, we're talking about the age profile? There's a lot of Kilkenny players, 7 or 8, that are over the age of 30. Are Kilkenny moving closer, or are they going to be going further away from Limerick here?
No, I'm afraid this is going to mean a rebuild for Kilkenny, in the sense that there's probably 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 players will probably not be involved next year, and we have to accept that. I mean, time waits for no man, as that saying goes, and Kilkenny are in that area now. These are players that have multiple All Irelands, have given great service to Kilkenny, and the bulk of them were in the starting in the subjects, and not all of them. And it's going to mean a change. And we haven't had a great underage set up for a long, long time. We won 20 last year, but there's the circumstances. I think you have to be harsh on ourselves and say here that our opponents were missing key players at various times when we played at the very stages of the championship, bar the first game against Offaly. So, to be honest about it, winning a 20 last year was great, and it gave a bit of a boost, and it brought a few lads onto Derek's panel. But in the overall scheme of things, you know, that's only one possible shining light in terms of where we have been coming. We haven't been performing at underage, and I think we have a fair bit of work to do now to try and assemble a new squad for the league next year. I think the Kilkenny Championships coming up, which start in 2 weeks' time, will be very interesting from the point of view of Derek Ling and his selectors. They are going to have to unearth probably as many as at least 10 youth players, I think, from a panel perspective. And that's not easily done, and it's not going to be easy to come back. Now, that doesn't mean that Kilkenny are not going to be very competitive next year. Of course there will be. But in terms of matching the likes of Limerick in particular, and that's the benchmark for everybody. Limerick, Kilkenny are somewhat off the pace as we finish this year and look forward to next year.
It's a bit of a last dance, Nicky, feel to it, in the sense of Derek Ling came in. Are you kind of thinking, you're kind of wondering in the first year, would there be not a clear out or anything like that, but would a lot of those new faces get a lot of game time? And perhaps they did in the league, but he kind of kept faith with a lot of the experience probably didn't work on the biggest stage despite winning 4 in a row in Leinster. So there's that feeling that there's going to be a hell of a lot of change coming down the road.
Yeah, but to be fair, to be fair to Derek, I think he did see the merit in holding on to those experienced players, and the majority of them were coming from the subs, and they were making an impact when they came in off the subs. Now, it didn't happen yesterday, so clearly, even before yesterday, irrespective of the result of yesterday, this was always going to be the last dance for quite a number of them. To be honest about it, and we have to accept the reality that time moves on. It will happen to Limerick in time as well. You were talking to Leo there, and can't argue with what he said about the 2 years, but it will happen to Limerick as well. But now the question for Limerick is, can they bring on further guys onto the squad that are really going to step in? He's making one hell of a job with guys like Cathal O'Neill and a number of more players there who would be on practically every other intercounty team. But Kilkenny have a bit of digging to do now to find at least 10 new panel members next year and to make the whole scene competitive. And that's why the upcoming championships are probably going to be more watched from that perspective than was ever the case, because it will be a different looking Kilkenny squad next year. There's no doubt about that.
Do you feel that the players are there, Nicky? And like, for example, your own clubman there, Tom Phelan, he's made an impact this year, scored 3 points. I'm sure that was a great source of pride seeing him popping over the bar, Connie, man. But like, he's 27, so they found somebody there, and obviously you'd have been aware of him all along. Are there other players that they can find out there, do you reckon?
Well, Tom probably would have made it a couple of years ago. He went on a J1 to America when I know the lads were keen to bring him on board, but he had finished in UCD, and actually Nicky English coached him a lot in UCD and taught a lot of them. But I think you've asked a very good question there, Shane, and I think it's something that Kilkenny will need to consider. Because we haven't had we've had no success at minor for a long time. We've had the under 20 success last year, but we need to keep that in context. That it may very well be that we need to look at the 24, 5 or 6 year olds now and to see what can they bring to the panel. Because I'm not sure we're going to get really fantastic 20, 21 year olds. We may have to go a little bit deeper up the food chain. And there's nothing wrong with getting guys in like that who are more maybe mature in the sense of their years, and maybe their hurling needs to be honed a bit. But I think that's where Kilkenny need to look, and not always be looking to who has come through the ranks of the immediate minor under 20 teams in more recent years, because there may be better players actually up the line. And look, it's an opportunity for some of the subs. Yes, you saw Alan Murphy coming on there, Owen's brother. I think that guy is not too bad, and I think if he got a steady run of time with Kilkenny, he could be a good player himself. You need to give guys consistent games, and it was something similar with Tom Phelan. Earlier in the year, he was starting games being taken off, and I know there was doubts setting into his own mind as to whether he was up to it or not. So you have to be brave enough and give guys a bit of time. And ironically, I think the league will be important for Kilkenny next year in the sense of trying to get new players in, understand the intercounty scene, and try and develop their game and develop for the championship. So look, it's a big task for Derek. There's no point in saying otherwise, and I can't turn around and say that there was people missing off the Kilkenny panel this year that they really should have on it. I have no gripe whatsoever with Derek and his selectors, but they're going to have to start digging deep now and seeing what's out there in the next couple of months as the championships progress.
I think, Shane, the post-Cody era really starts next year. That's my own opinion. Like, he's basically carried on the legacy of Cody's squad. Now this is his first really rebuild. He brought in some lads and they got game time in the league and played some championship or whatever. But next year is the real kind of start, if you get me. There's probably a bit of a legacy from Cody's reign that probably carried on this year, and Derek changed up a few bits. But next year will be when you'll really see probably his stamp being put on it. And as Nicky says there, you would expect to see a hell of a lot of new faces around the place, because he's no longer looking at 2023 and just that year. He's now looking at 24, 25, 26, 27. What can he get out of a lad in maybe even two years' time as well? I think he'd be looking towards maybe a more of a long-term vision from probably next year, probably from today onwards, I'd say, realistically.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel that this time next year we'll be looking at a Limerick Kilkenny All-Ireland final?
I doubt it. Now,
you writing off Kilkenny?
No, the structure of the championship means it's probably likely enough, but I do expect there to be a fair turnover there. Of the 26 that togged out yesterday, will 22 of them be there next year? Could they lose some of the greatest players that they've ever produced in the off season? Potentially as well. So as I said, I do think like Derek Ling's job probably properly starts now, because I think he has to really start thinking, forget about 2023 here. I need to be looking at next year, the year after that, and the year after that. And that's probably, with a lot of young blood coming in. So yeah, expect some of the old guard maybe to exit and a lot of new blood to come in.
Do you think it's realistic to expect TJ Reid to be talking out again for Kilkenny next year? Like, he will be 36, obviously 37 then at the end of the championship next year. He's he's a new father. He had a child earlier in the year. You can talk about what it's like, but obviously everyone has a different...
Unbelievably difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's in a situation where the baby sleeps nicely every night and he's able to get full night's sleep.
They actually Neve de Bruyne had a post somewhere where they said they've kind of got a sleep expert in to help with the baby sleeping, which probably helps a bit as well, and maybe helps TJ get a few the odd normal amount of hours of sleep, because you're totally denied that. I think a lot will depend on how the club season goes. If you look at last year, like he carried a knock the whole way through Ballyhale's run and was basically given the whole of the league off. I think the first game he tugged out for Kilkenny was the league final, and then he started the championship. So a lot will depend on, I'd say, how the kind of club season goes at Ballyhale. I'd say realistically, if for TJ to definitely come back next year, it would probably be maybe an early exit for Ballyhale or them not winning the Kilkenny championship, and that
seems unlikely.
They're heavy favourites to win the Kilkenny championship. If they win the Kilkenny championship, they'll probably go on a run and will be in an All-Ireland semi-final at the least. So it's kind of hard to make a call on that at this kind of moment in time. His body will probably tell him. Realistically, his body will probably, when's the club final fixed for? Probably, is it January next year? His body will tell him probably around February whether he's going back. But saying that, I think the All-Ireland final was maybe only a week or 10 days old last year, and he had committed to Derek Ling straight away for the year ahead. I think maybe a day or two before Derek took over as manager. So maybe he'll do so again.
Yeah, I'm sure, like, you'd expect that Richie Hogan will probably call time here. I mean, former hurler of the year, owes Kilkenny nothing, had a brilliant career, all told. But it's probably unlikely, like, he's been getting, handfuls of minutes here and there with the amount of effort required and what you're putting your body through. I just don't know if when you're turning 35, if you'd go for another year of that.
Yeah, as well as that, Derek Ling probably has to ponder, he started one game this year, I think, and he came on in a couple of games. Like, as good as Richie is, are you denying another fella a place to the point of thinking long term, thinking next year, the year after, and after, and after, and after? So that would be very, very interesting to see. Like, what an amazing player. Had injury really robbed us of probably 5 or 6 years of what would have been absolute brilliance. Maybe Kilkenny would have another All-Ireland if he hadn't been struck down with the injuries that he was. But no, I probably don't expect to see him there next year, being honest.
So potentially you could be losing 2 former hurlers of the year, which, leadership, whatever it might be. And I'd imagine the last number of years have been very tough for Richie Hogan. The amount of injuries he's had, like, that's got to be very tough on a person.
I just want to fly through really quickly. So just potentially with some of those guys gone, like Owen Murphy has a couple of All-Irelands. We'll go down to a team. Mikey Butler, no All-Irelands. Hugh Lawler the same. Tommy Walsh the same. David Blanchfield the same. Richie Reid has maybe one from 15. Maybe.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, Paddy Deegan, no. Conor Fogarty again. Question marks whether he'll come back. He just keeps trucking along, but question marks whether he comes back. Adrian Mullen, no All-Ireland. Tom Phelan, Martin Keown, John Donnelly, Billy Ryan, Owen Cody. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all of a sudden they could be fairly short of experience, when you take a couple of those names away from there.